The art chooses you. Welcome back to the channel, you guys. My name is PatrickGregoryDaniels. If you haven't met me before, feel free to go ahead and drop your name and introduce yourself in the comment section. Like I always say, I just want to respect you guys for the individuals that you are, and I want to create a channel that further facilitates, humanizing the internet experience so that we can act and present ourselves as the way that we really are in real life. Because if I saw you in real life, I say, hey, what's your name? How are you? It's a pleasure to meet you. So the art, it chooses you. The calling, the moment that the rhythm found you, it's like the first pull towards expression. Before you knew it, you were already answering. I think about these reflex actions that we have in life, the way you express yourself, the way that you have to express yourself, the way that there's something just inert inside of you that has to be able to have its opportunity to be able to share its piece. It's PICE and it's PESCE. It's interesting, to just find that we are these types of individuals that have a sense for being individualistic, a sense to be able to separate ourselves, a sense to, like I always say when my friends and I are talking and they'll politely say, forgive me for interrupting. I would often say to them that, there's never an interruption. You can't provide periods to any sentence. Life is like a non-ending sentence. It never ends, so the only thing that you can ever add to this idea that I'm presenting right now, and maybe perhaps you're expressing that you're interrupting me, you're merely a comma, and I don't mean merely from the sense of like only or minimizing your contribution, but it's this thing that all you can do is be an addition. You're uplifting the moment. You're making it more than what it once were. When I was speaking, now we're both speaking. Now we've become a community. That same sense that we have to want to add to, what people are doing and join and collaborate and, team up with. We have those same things that, we see from day to day when we're just trying to, add a piece in class and, present, or we're trying to, solidify our painting in the world, or we're trying to create our body of art and things of that nature. And it's just like, it really is a rhythm, it's a pattern that exists within our bodies, out of all the other things that we got to do in our lives and want to do in our lives and are inclined to do in our lives. There's this sense to want to just express, and it's so interesting because it's so normal. It's so normal to put our own take on things and our own touch on things. It's so beautiful. It's also interesting now, today one of the most said phrases I hear is, faith or God or whatever you believe in, and I'm not knocking that at all, but it's like the foundation of faith, it exists in creation, and it exists in art, for sure. And I think that we tend to, believe and form more belief through repetition. There's like a quiet trust in a groove that holds everything together. I think that's why, when we look at things like drum and bass and rhythm and bass, and we look at things like relationships, and we look at things like just all the different partnerships and all the different couples in the world that work out, all of the different genres, all of the different art forms, all of the different food items, garlic and butter, basil and tomato, I'm sure there's plenty others, salt and pepper, drum and bass, rhythm and blues, just there's something that bonds these things together, and it comes from a state of repetition. The more people do certain things, the more we do these things. I do also think that like a sense of minimalization, helps us to more readily identify those elements that help to form these bonds. But I think through the marrying of the bonds, we notice them more readily through the state of repetition. And I think that that's just such a beautiful thing. This quiet trust in a groove that holds everything together. Ultimately, it builds our faith, and I find that to be just so amazing. It's like this deep, consistent bass line is the heartbeat beneath all of the thought. What underlying elements are there that are consistently holding things together through your artistry, through your craft, through your creativity, and through your life? It's almost like the bass is this thread that's just holding the entire fabric together. It doesn't get a lot of the shine. People notice it and they pay attention to it. And sometimes people are like, man, that bass line is nice. Or sometimes people will say, this whatever fill in the blank element is very nice. But there's always these underlying foundations of faith that are holding everything together. And it's such a beautiful element if we kind of practice noticing where our attention goes, and then trying to pay attention to those subtle elements there as well, those unsung heroes, if you will, the bass lines. Also, let's take a moment for our sponsors. No, I'm just playing, but seriously though, if you would like to support my musical works directly at Bandcamp, the art continues because of you. The language of light. I don't know that it matters that your art form is photography or music or whatever it might be, but I think photography works really well when we talk about the language of light, because it's how we understand those things that aren't present that help us to form the appreciation and execution of the things that we're fully aware of that are present. Understanding the invisible, the harmony and the intuition, color, connection. The art began teaching you its own language, as we pay attention to some form or shape or sound or frequency or tendency or intentionality or mood or some way, some feeling. We're able to pay attention to those moments that lack all that it is that we know, and that mere absence becomes a newfound presence, and therefore the values begin to realistically be established. I appreciate sound because I've also known silence. The art truly began teaching me its own language. And then I think, what's really interesting is that oftentimes we think about, everything being everything. And once we learn one thing, we can learn how to learn those other things by the way that we've applied different understandings. It's like we start to depict and decode those languages and realize that, everything really is the same. It makes me think of things like synesthesia. Synesthesia is that I think it's kind of, when I think about synesthesia, you got people like Quincy Jones that it's been, I don't want to say rumored, but you can't be in someone's body, so you can't necessarily experience what they've experienced. or anything like that, but people like Quincy Jones and I think Pharrell Williams say that they have or had synesthesia. And what it merely means is that you're experiencing one sense by way of another sense, so I'm hearing sound, or I'm tasting sight, you know what I mean, things like like seeing sounds, and I think that it's I don't think you have to be like born with something like that. I think that you just have to have an understanding for one thing and be able to pass on the way that you experience that thing through another experience, if you eat food and it gives you this spicy taste and this spicy feeling, maybe there's a way to imagine, for example, like an element being blue, when you maybe relate blue and its darkness and it's and I'm thinking about more of a navy blue kind of after dawn before night kind of feeling, 8 o'clock at night, not 10 to 2 in the morning, but where it's the blue hour of the day, that blue hour of the day it has had a relationship very often time in the nature of jazz as we know it, the nature of melancholy, the nature of just deep thinking and introspection, correlated with out of the norm types of livelihood sometimes, and some would say, very similar to things like struggle, and so it's kind of, I don't want to say it's easy. Well, yeah, actually it's easy to create from a blue place because we've all experienced certain emotions and certain feelings. You can relate that redness to whatever you want to relate it to, that blueness to whatever you want to relate it to, that greenness for love and desire, for understanding and knowledge. I think you can pick all those things out, and I think as we practice, trying to express one through the other, I think that, synesthesia can be a learned practice, so to speak. Yeah. The moment you listen inside and then speak back outside, confidence, tone, soul, spirit, they help. You realize the sound has your face. And that's actually like one of the reasons I love instruments so much. It's the voice of becoming. You can hear your growth. You can hear how the imperfections stack together to become what you can further define as reality and originality and authenticity. There's a sense of individuality, but more so like I was saying, the authenticity, or like how you can look in a mirror and over time you age or you change, but you still know that what you're looking at right there in that moment is undeniably you, and it's undeniably truth. And it's so beautiful to think about that voice of becoming, the way that we can look inside for confidence in our soul. And sometimes, I won't say sometimes, but every single time, what it is that you hear from the inside, it has a way of, coming along with sheer confidence, right? Like, that what you hear inside is undeniably you. But sometimes there's just there's a portion or a part of what you're hearing that, once you speak it out and you express it through whatever avenues or ways that you express it, that I think the fact that it's so individualistic, that's where we can sometimes pick up and notice on that individuality, and so I describe sometimes individuality as imperfection. And the thing about it is that it really is truly perfect, but it's amazing when you put so many different elements together that are coming purely from yourself, and it has this sense of feeling just so fully complete. Once you put them all together and you can listen to it all together, you can see visually, what it is you made and everything. That's why I say that you realize that the sound, the art, if you will, it has your face. I don't have any children, but I'm pretty sure that, the kids, the parents out there that are listening, know what it feels like to see something that you've created, have your own face. Let me know what that's like. We've heard in the movies and things all the time that, I think I was watching Manifestation, or was it Blacklist? I was watching one of those two on Netflix yesterday, and the mothers will always say, there's nothing greater, than being a mother. There's nothing greater. I don't know if the fathers say that. They probably say the same thing, but to create something that literally, walking and or sounding off, or visually holding space on a wall, or something poetic that has meaning on paper that others can pull and derive their own meanings from, is really interesting. It even goes another step, because those things that you've created, we've created, all the artists out there in the world have created, they even go on to have a whole different interpretation. You've heard artists say that they made this song and the song meant a specific thing to them, but once they pass that song and they release it, in quotes, release it, the song sometimes began to have a new meaning for other people. They end up taking people through moments in their lives that are not, synonymous with the moment that created that song, provided peace for, the moment that artist created. It's like, I might be creating something to get something out of my system, because I've come to terms with it and I have peace with it now. But that same thing that I'm using to express my peace might be a thing that's giving someone else peace. And so it's just really amazing to think about, how you can go inside, for meaning and soulful recollection and spiritual grounding. But yet all of that, it's like you're giving birth. We're making art, we're making things, but it's something that's so much bigger than anything that words could ever describe. They start to have another life of their own and become, someone else's baby that, encourages them and inspires them through a whole nother moment that, we may never have any idea or any clue about. Also, every now and then I place music clips online, but if you're just socializing on IG or Twitter or something like that, send me a what's up on IG too at PatrickGregoryDaniels. All right. Texture and space. Silence as a teacher. Understanding that absence, air, and restraint are also part of art. Even quiet moments sculpt you. I think about my bachelor's in fine arts at school, how we elaborate and shape things and apply impressions with, different tools, whether it be pen or a gesture or a pencil or a paintbrush or, some type of graphic impression or some type of, three-dimensional relief and a sculpture of the sort. The presence of those things were, really amazing, but it's interesting how much the absence of those things still are expressing an expression as well. I think in the last film, one of the points that I kind of brought back up was that if you make a decision or don't make a decision, the lack thereof is still a choice being made, And I think, just musically, something similar in my sphere of focus lately has been paying attention to texture, as a sound, because it's kind of in the background. It's even further in the background than something like a bass line. It's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, because there's texture of, texture of tape. There's high-end texture and high-end frequencies, if you listen really hard and close, to, just the sonic frequency spectrums that you hear, from tapes and CDs, and, when you plug something in, there's these high-end sounds that you hear sometimes. And I think, while those things are still very present, I wonder to myself, and I try to allow my explorative mind to allow those things to teach me as well. I think, even as human beings, sometimes we want to decide and label how much quality and value it is that's coming from an individual based upon, their financial income or the lifestyle that they're living. If they're living a more wealthy lifestyle, then they have to be of more value to knowledgeable importance. And while I'm not saying that that's something that we actively practice intentionally, I'm saying, to myself that sometimes we accidentally make value choices based upon just our natural reactions and reflexes. And so I think while we might do things like that with our natural sociological humanity and the exploration and the experience of life, I'm saying that there's also little tiny things such as texture that we might be, ignoring. I mean, somebody rocks all black and it's like, man, that's beautiful. But, is it black leather with a nice gloss and some impressions of leather and, animal fabric, animal work, and, like I said, texture, but like, that ability for a texture to be semi-permeable or to be permeable or not be permeable at all. We're talking about mesh, we're talking about leather, we're talking about corduroy with these nice lines and things of that nature. A lot of my best buds, man, Jay and Mike and all my buddies from college, rock a lot of different texture. It's an unspoken feeling. I think texture is a way that we communicate, not only that synesthetic way of feeling, I'm feeling blue, I'm feeling, really green, I'm feeling really orange, but, while communicating that feeling, we're able to, dig deeper in those depths of feeling with a more subtle nuance in our type of communication by, giving you a textural ambience, speaking with a loud sensitivity, and it's just beautiful. It reminds me of how Virgil Abloh talked about how, he got to a point in his livelihood where he wanted to start sculpting spaces more, sculpting the spaces and shaping the spaces, arranging and curating the spaces that he placed things into. Because if you placed this hypothetical can into, a garage, it looks like trash. But if you place it on a pedestal, column in the middle of an all white space surrounded by glass with an enclosure of stainless steel frames that we would call an art museum or art gallery, now it's art. And so I think allowing texture and space to be that silent teacher, if you will, is something else beautiful that we can look a little deeper, and pay a little bit more nuanced attention to in order to find more fun and more creativity. A lot of these synthesizers have a white noise setting. A lot of these tape machines have, their own organic textures. Do it in the box with the plugins, or don't do it in the box with the plugins. Maybe stop repainting all of those layers in order to get rid of our strokes. Sometimes we edit the living life out of the feeling of the art. Even quiet moments sculpt you. The art chose you. It wasn't pursuit, it was destiny. You didn't choose this life, it revealed itself through your hands. And I think that even if we want to say that it revealed itself through our hands, I have to say that because we're so individually special and unique and authentic and organic, and we're so varying in our ways, that I think the art didn't necessarily reveal itself through our hands, but it revealed itself through our fingerprint, you know. Makes me think of Salahi Bimberry, you know. It's like so much in our hand, so much that we're just naturally drawn to, that we just have to do. You know, reminds me of this tattoo that I have under my wrist that you probably can't see, but it's a question mark, arrow up equals music. And buddy of mine in college, Josh Gary, I had him do that work for me. And you know, at one point in time, I decided that my formula for life was going to be question mark, arrow up equals music, which is, you know, what's up equals music, you know, because for me, you know, my ascension through life and my direction through life, you know, I already knew what it was. You know, it was, you know, I'm not the one sitting here saying that you got to do what your dad did and you got to do what your mom did and you got to do what your grandmother did. You know, it's in the family. But you know, I'm definitely excited that what was already in my family was something that I was very interested in. And I think it's kind of hard not to be interested in those things. If you're truly going in the direction of what you're interested in, your environment will have those things around you. And it's almost like a child going through childhood will be picking up the breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumbs will be those paint brushes that you had around the house and those easels that you had around the house. You know, I'm not saying that someone won't go and become completely interested in something, you know, quite out of the ordinary. But, you know, for me, you know, when grandmother's piano was in the home, and I love that piano, roll to, That's Just the Way It Is, you know. And I didn't have piano lessons as a kid, but every summer I was ripping a sheet of paper and putting a number on it and putting it on top of the piano keys, so I knew which one to press next in order to play the song that I really loved hearing. So I can, you know, I want to play what I'm hearing that I love. And now we're at this point in life where we're, you know, creating love, you know. I mean, I find myself nowadays not like, I love a style of music and I love the elements, you know. Like in my studio, I have salt and pepper and cayenne pepper and garlic, and, you know, I have peppers in here and things of that nature. But I'm experiencing and experimenting with different seasonings and flavors, and I'm putting them together in various ways. I'm enjoying creating my own new fingerprints, so that you know, they can find themselves in the world, and maybe and hopefully, you know, some individual will walk up and see all of these collected fingerprints that I've created with all of these different lines and you know, curvaceous lines that, you know, create the fingerprint. And maybe, you know, I release all these fingerprints, maybe just one day somebody will reach out and give them a high five, you know, shake their hand, you know, love the print and the impressions that were created with all of these individual elements, this ensemble, if you will, and want to give them a hug and want to carry them throughout their life and want to, connect to these elements in order to one day create what it is that they love and share some more love in a unified mix, But I know you didn't choose this life, and I know that it chose you. But allow this art to continually reveal itself in your hands. And along the way, continue to enjoy your own individual fingerprint. Create new fingerprints. Make new beautiful things. Share beauty. Encourage beauty. And look in the background, and appreciate the background too. Appreciate the texture. Appreciate the space. Appreciate all of those things that that are silent, that we don't say anything about. Remember that the art chose you.